Howdy, folks. How are y'all doing? We're back for another episode, this time number 24. And we are returning to the Thomas Ligotti story called Nyctalops, if that's how you pronounce it. And this is the third installment of a three-part triptych of a short story. And so this will conclude the Nyctalops. And at some point, we'll pick up with more Thomas Ligotti and do some other stories. So part 1 is episode 3, and then part 2 is episode 11. And so now we're on 24, so I probably shouldn't wait too much longer to deliver this third part. I have it already like on my tablet and ready to go. And so the big deliberation for today was what content I was going to work on. And I've decided to do the Nyctalops instead because, you know, the last time I did a talk on the Nyctalops was episode 11. And I think it's time to wrap that one up. And we'll do the NLP stuff later. But I'm really excited about it because it's pretty spicy. So we'll get into Thomas Ligotti's The Nyctalops 3. And this one is called The Eye of the Lynx. And this is mainly for the sake of completion here. So Thomas Ligotti's The Nyctalops, Part 3, The Eye of the Lynx. Parts 1 and 2 are called The Chemist and Drink to Me Only with Labyrinthine Eyes. This is the second one. All three installments of this sort of triptych revolve around the concept of a psychopathic male figure who has somehow or another been endowed with supernatural talents which enable him to capture, exploit, or torment a female figure who is objectified in some way and displayed according to their sick and distorted imagination. It's not stated whether or not it's the same guy in all three stories. I tend to think it's not the same guy, but rather the same spirit which possesses all three. It's the spirit of a psychopath. In these instances, a male dignified psychopath. These vignettes can be interpreted as supporting a kind of feminist narrative. I don't know particularly if that's his intention or what his opinions are on that matter. I'd have to read more of his stuff in order to find out. I don't know what his political views are like. Most people in this genre who write these kind of books tend to favor the left, if Stephen King and Clive Barker are any indication. And that's probably the genre I'd cast this guy in, but, you know, I don't want to put limits on the guy. I mean, he might be a little bit more elevated in his style than Stephen King, who I'd cast as a sort of entertainment for ninth graders. Clive Barker is maybe a level above King there, maybe 11th grade. But Ligotti's a little bit more artful, hearkening back a bit to Edgar Allan Poe and H.P. Lovecraft. I don't see a whole lot of Stephen King in Ligotti, honestly. So I guess other than just the time period in which he was popular, well, I guess we can just throw Stephen King out of there. So again, you've got these male characters, each at the outset of the story boasting of their supernatural abilities and subsequently preying on unsuspected female victims, disrupting their existence and incorporating their essence in some compulsive and sadistic fashion. It's a classic misogynistic psychopath archetype. Perhaps what you'd get with someone like Ted Bundy. So the first chapter or the first installment of The Chemist, Chemist with a Y, is about this kind of rich, conceited guy who fancies himself a sort of modern day alchemist. He's definitely into the philosophy. He looks at things through that lens and boasts about his rich, esoteric knowledge. And what we've got is a one-sided conversation in that first story, meaning you only hear his words and not the words of the woman he's speaking with, in this case, a prostitute. And he takes her to a bar, and he's really uptight about her habits and mannerisms, trying to control her behavior and trying to control what she puts into her body, as if he's prepping her for something. And at the same time, sort of lording his personality and accomplishments over her. After a bit, they go out to his car, and there's a police officer standing by his car, which is maybe a little too nice to be expected in that particular downtown neighborhood. Well, he sweet talks the cop for a bit, trying to impress him with his supposed profession of working for a pharmaceutical company who just made a significant breakthrough. So he leaves with this prostitute on their way back to her apartment, and he's got this briefcase with him, which he seems to be extremely protective over. They get to her apartment, and he doses her with this particular drug that he's concocted. And he tells her that under the influence of this drug, she will take on whatever physical form he imagines for her before she dies, frozen forever into that form. And he turns her into this contorted, homunculus type of figure. In the second story, or installment, part 2 of the triptych, titled Drink to Me Only with Labyrinthine Eyes, we have a different kind of psychopath. This is a man who boasts a particular endowment he was born with, which are his spectacular eyes, which enable him to hypnotize anybody he wants. And he's lived this kind of Dorian Gray lifestyle of excess and luxury, manipulating people at will and taking full advantage of them until his own power thirsted for more and more fulfillment to satisfy this kick. And so, in his current stage, he has taken on the vocation of this sort of high society party entertainer. In his free time, he's sneaking into morgues and stealing female cadavers and bringing them to these parties. And he charges his clients these exorbitant rates to gather all of their guests into a room where he hypnotizes them and treats them to a magic show where he uses the dead woman as a prop, convincing his audience that she is alive and beautiful and graceful. And he does all these absurd stunts with her body, and everybody thinks she is radiant. And after the show, he mingles with the audience, and he kind of slowly dips out away from the crowd and allows the audience members to dance with her and take photographs with her. And the whole time he's sort of slipping out the back door. Well, a little kid comes out of his room and sits at the top of his stairs. And he turns around and he sees this kid. And he goes up to talk to the kid. And he asks the kid if the kid can see the girl. And although they are at a distance, the kid says he can see her and that she looks yucky. Well, he hypnotizes the kid and tells him to go back to bed and forget all about everything he's seen by morning time. So the kid goes back to bed and the guy slips out the back door. And he's programmed everyone to come out of their trance the moment he rings the doorbell. So right as he's leaving, he rings the doorbell and walks off to his car and drives away. So in this third one, the third story, the third installment of the triptych of the Nyctalops, entitled Eye of the Lynx, we have this whole other kind of psychopath who takes the lives of women unto himself in a way that I'll get into towards the end here. In this case, the jolly fellow claims he's been on this particular girl's psychic frequency for some time, but other matters delayed their meeting in the flesh until now. Apparently, this guy consumes extravagant resources in the pursuit of fulfilling this immoral hunger. It's explained that he's part of an underground network which procures companions for guys like him who have specific tastes and a preference for types. In this case, young women sporting the goth image. Lol. Not that he was shy about approaching these women personally. He was sufficiently confident, sufficiently evil. In fact, any squeamishness or aversion they might have towards him excited him even more, and actually increased his productivity in this hedonist occupation. And his activities had already attracted the attention of local journalists. And even the underground agency itself had become aware of the recent occurrence of missing girls. Presently, he stood on the sidewalk outside her place of business. Then he went inside, where he saw a slew of girls lounging around the lobby on what appeared to be old church pews. The room was filled with an electric reddish haze. Security cameras up in the corners of the room watched silently. He didn't mind the surveillance. For all he knew, we were all woven into the digital tapestry. He was approached by a young hostess with blonde hair who welcomed him into the House of Chains and recited a list of services, terms, and disclaimers, finally asking if he was a member of law enforcement. He assured her that he wasn't, and that he'd simply spotted their ad in a back page of a local tabloid. Apparently there was no internet yet. He asked her, "I've come to the right place, haven't I?" She answered, "You sure have." The lighting in the room gave the impression of bloody moonlight. He thought out every word to himself before she spoke it, as if he was controlling her. "What will it be tonight?" she asked. "You see anything you like?" He possessed a knowing that he was in complete control of the situation. And that was his special talent. As if each moment was being fed directly from his imagination. The blonde-haired young lady was different from the others. She was no dabbler of darkness and degeneracy, but a true professional. He was directly tuned in to the intense focus of her romantic nature. Although she pretended to be tough, he could sense her actual submissiveness. She pushes a button next to an intercom and authoritatively summons an underling to take over for her at the front door. She then turns back to the man and looks him up and down. Her eyes told a story of her life and fantasy. He saw the entire drama played out in detail. Her subjective life in a dream world beset with dangers and frustrations, erotic conflicts, and delicate dress. The fantasy features herself as a gothic baroness, deprived of her title by a big man with bushy eyebrows, which he sometimes sprinkles with glitter. By her impoverishment, the bushy-browed man who came out of the forest while she was in retreat at a Carmelite nunnery intended to force her into his arms, but she would not succumb until she was ready. She imagines herself in lavish dress when the glitter-browed villain peers into her apartment window. She shrinks with terror, quite literally to the size of a doll, and dashes to the corner of the room, enveloped in enormous shadow, dreaming there throughout the night. She'll wake from these dreams as her normal everyday self and go back to work. Now, back at the House of Chains, she led the guy out of the anteroom and into the interior of the shop. He feigned sheepishness as he asked whether he would get what he paid for. She responded with feigned arrogance as she answered that satisfaction was guaranteed. They descended some metal stairs into a basement hallway with a painting on the wall and some rooms reserved for specialty clients. She showed him a room with a dog collar and chain hanging from a door handle. It was empty, save a layer of straw sparsely covering a bare cement floor. They gazed at each other for a moment under the red meat-colored light before she led him back upstairs. She asked where he was from. He told her it was a real small place, out of state, that she wouldn't even find it on a road map. She asked again if he'd ever been to a place like this before. He lied and said that he hadn't. She said because some customers run amok when they finally experience for real what they'd only imagined or seen in magazines or on video. He assured her that wouldn't be him. So they went on. As they passed several doors, he could see through them, another one of his particular superpowers, and he witnessed the depraved scenes happening all around. People doing all kinds of kinky shit. I won't describe them in detail. You'll have to get the book for that. Just some DJ Coomers having themselves a good old time. Or a miserable time, depending on how you want to frame it. So she led him up an exhausting steep climb of stairs, up into what must have been a tower. She told him that was where he was going to get his money's worth. She had no idea yet how much. He ordered her to show him her worst. And I don't mean bratwurst, as she eyed the undersized door before them. Then she got them all chained up, and they were engaged in some sort of perverted wicked witch and slave puppet show, where she was administering punishment in a grotesque fashion for some supposed bad behavior. He was in full character and had externalized the details of the fantasy. And she croaked dirty admonitions into his wooden ear. He shuddered just for show and would have worked up some perspiration had he been actually composed of flesh and not made of wood. She was all into character, and she told him she would make him touch the fire and burn him from the legs up. To that he responded, "And what will you do with all those old dresses, gloves, veils, and capes when I'm gone? What will you do in your low-rent castle with no one to stare, his brow of glittering silver, into the windows of your dreams?" Perhaps the puppet was perspiring after all, for his brow was now glistening with tiny flecks of starlight. The witch stepped back and whipped off her hood, exposing the blonde hair beneath it. She demanded to know how he knew about all that stuff, which she had never spoken a word about to anyone. She accused him of peeping Tomism, of breaking and entering, and of illicit curiosity in general. "Let me out of these chains and I'll tell you everything," he said. "Forget it," she said. "I'm going to get someone to throw you out of here." "Then I'll just have to release myself," he said, and the manacles opened and fell to the floor by themselves. He tells her she knows him already, that they've been together many times, alluding to her own private fantasy life, and he being the active character within those fantasies, and how conversely she is the recurring character in a long line of victims for him. He reveals to her her private desire to be ultimately taken, how the uncertainty of the outcome of her work was so much of the thrill, and how the reality of this moment was really what she was waiting for. How everything about this dark propensity for her led to this inevitable outcome, and how this temporary vocation was but a cheap copy where she had been floundering until now. And he was there to rescue her from all of that. As she tried to back away from him, he bid her surrender to the inevitable and allow him to take her to a place where the torture never stops. All she had to do was let herself go and fall into him. And that she did. He enveloped her, incorporated her. She was inside of him now, with all the others. Kind of like on Nightmare on Elm Street when Freddy lifts up his sweater, and you could see all the faces of his victims inside his torso, pressing up against his flesh, trying to get out. She was the new prized possession in his gallery of frail little dolls, all there for his amusement only. Once he had assimilated her, he retraced his steps, up and down stairways and through corridors of scarlet darkness. He said goodnight to the remaining girls in the reception room before stepping outside onto the street. He sort of checked to make sure she was incarcerated within him. She had made an attempt to free herself, but was unsuccessful. At this point, something really funny happens that I didn't expect. It almost doesn't really fit the story, and it kind of adds a sort of absurdity to it, if that's even possible at this point. As he passed this drunk dude on the sidewalk, an arm shot out of his torso at like a right angle to like the rest of him. And the drunk staggered over with this jolly vigor and sort of shook the hand, reaching blindly between the bars of its cage. Then he, proceeded on his way, just kind of fucked off there. Now a captive of his heart and its infinite chambers, her fabulous prison. She and all the others would be subjected to his every whim and desire. But soon he would need to find more. Some of the old ones melted away like icicles in the dank bowels of his castle home. In the meantime, he'd keep an eye out for those who walk the earth in glad submission to gloom. He watched the traffic light turn from amber to red, signifying what was to come for his new flame and himself, now one in flesh as well as in dreams. Well, that's the end. That's the third part of the Nyctalops. We'll do more Ligotti stories later. Okay, so I got through that Ligotti thing pretty quick. I wasn't really expecting it to come off that quickly or that smoothly. That's what I said the last time I took X-Lax, actually. So I was thinking about it. I just got up to take a piss a minute ago. And I was thinking, while I was taking a piss, because that's when I usually get my best ideas, I'm just going to go ahead and do the NLP thing now. Because while I was doing the Nyctalops thing, I realized that it fits in perfectly with the whole motif. The whole idea that you've got this hypnotist guy who's a psychopathic male misogynistic creep, right? I mean, like, what could be more appropriate to the idea of linking NLP to the pickup arts, the arts of pickup and seduction? So I am just going to jump right into that shit and continue it, and it'll fit right in with the whole spirit of what's going on, because I wasn't even sure if I wanted to do this NLP thing anyway. And honestly, I didn't even really want to do the Nyctalops thing. The only reason I did is because I really like the first two installments of the story. And it's not that I don't like this last one, but the last one was my least favorite of the three. I really like the second one. The second one to me was pretty brutal. It was a pretty brutal idea. But the whole thing fits right in, I think, with the whole psychopathic vibe. And the idea that someone's going to go around using like esoteric tricks and hypnosis to try and possess women. It's just, how did I not think of it before? So I'm just going to jump right in and do the NLP stuff right now. The aforementioned promised episode on NLP and its relation to the arts of pickup and seduction, which I was reluctant to get started on. I didn't really want to do it. I wanted to do one that was just an overview on just NLP in general. But I wanted to give an honest overview of how I got into that and how it became a thing, because it has a certain mechanics about it. And the mechanics are probably most readily and most easily explained by me in those terms, because that is probably to the larger extent how I've used it in my own personal history. And it's an interesting story on top of that. And I think in this day and age it's useful, because so many young people today have been discouraged and been drawn away from the act of meeting and even coming into the vicinity of members of the opposite sex, I've heard some disturbing statistics about not only birth rates but just virginity rates in young men. And I'm not here to like help out the young men or whatever. I'm not trying to start some kind of like coaching course for young men trying to date or anything like that. But I had a pretty good run in my time, and I made a systematic study of the phenomenon. And because of that, I think I'm able to impart some sort of, I don't want to say guidance because I'm not here for that, some sort of an overview and some sort of a reassurance that it's really okay. Because somehow in our society, in our new modern day, almost Puritan zeitgeist that we live in today, it is much widely believed, among young people especially, that for a young male to be aggressive in his pursuit of what he wants for himself in his life, in his love life, in his professional life, in his financial life, that to exercise those functions, those masculine functions, is something very terrible and something very taboo by the standards of what we've been learning in our universities. And when I went to college, I was lucky and fortunate that I was old enough to really see through a lot of that bullshit. And most of my professors were my age. And so, like, I've got the psychology teacher kind of preaching her worldview to the whole class, and I'm thinking to myself, bitch, you used to sit behind me in biology class, kicking the back of my chair. You know, you were the one with the gothic makeup on, right? You know, so, like, I wasn't as affected as I think a lot of the people who were there. And unlike everybody else who was there, I was one of the, I mean, I know it's probably a little different once you get to like graduate levels and stuff, but at the community college level, I was like the only person reading the textbooks. Like everybody else was going on like Quizlet and like just funking around doing stupid stuff and not really giving it their all. And I was giving it my all. And a lot of the skills that I learned in NLP was what I was using in college as far as my studying tactics. But not only that, that was what they were teaching. So a lot of NLP comes out of like university psychology, you know, like academic psychology. A large portion of what NLP is just academic psychology. In addition to other things, in addition to linguistics, logic, you know, logical fallacies. That was the beginning of it. When you look at Richard Bandler and John Grinder's first set of books that they had, the Structure of Magic. I hate the way that they titled those books because they kind of framed the whole thing in this sort of like magic language, you know, they're talking about wizards and shit. And I thought that sort of detracted a little bit from it because I thought that there were some good things in there. I titled this one The Structure of Magic Volume 1, which is the name of the Richard Bandler, John Grinder book, The Structure of Magic. There's 2 volumes. Volume 1 is about the linguistic side of it, and Volume 2 is about the body language side of it. And I don't think I go into Volume 2 at all, but I'm going to start with this one. Okay, so NLP. This is a subject I dedicated a considerable portion of time to more than 10 years ago. The first thing I'll say is I've never been quite sure whether or not any of this actually works for much. In fact, by its own very nature, it's difficult to gauge the success of it or of your own progress in it, unless you happen to be engaged in some sort of workshop where you can test and record your results with any real degree of accuracy against another person. But even then, you're dealing with an artificial environment with suspecting and cooperative subjects. And I've never taken any of these seminars. I assume it's a little bit like traveling snake oil salesman, peddling products and charging people exorbitant amounts for this sort of Wizard of Oz to hang a medal around their necks for personal powers they've sort of possessed all along. So I'm not sure exactly how people get certified or demonstrate proficiency. But in real life, in real time, with people in real circumstances, it's difficult to determine whether or not your time is well spent in trying to develop these methodologies. For me, it was all more or less just pie in the sky. As I came to learn this stuff, I only ever actually implemented it in real time as far as some of the scanning techniques. Yet, a lot of the learning techniques that were a little bit more on the intellectual side of it, I know that I did achieve some level of success in the modeling portion of it, where I could model certain learning behaviors and certain organization of learning techniques, I would say. I just kind of bought the books, read them, made notes, and tried to think about the methodologies as I went about my daily business. So what is it really? I would say that one phrase, which could wrap up all the diverse aspects of NLP, would be that it's a modeling process. And what do I mean by that? It's about creating cognitive models of various kinds in order to improve your performance and enrich your experience. And that sounds pretty vague. I mean, already we're drifting into the world of mumbo jumbo and we start talking about experience. But that's kind of self-help programs for you in general. They're usually pretty vague. When you make things as vague as possible, it's a lot easier to guarantee results. And that's a word they use a lot, result. They're like, oh, the results that you desire. You know, like when you read, what's that one guy's name? The guy with the horse face that has those infomercials? Was it Tony Robbins? Is that his name? He's always talking about, the results you desire. Get the results you desire immediately, you know, and it's based on NLP and Scientology and stuff. And so that's essentially what it is. I mean, it's self-help. I mean, you could say in a way it's almost like Scientology or Dianetics, which I know almost nothing about, but I have seen some of their marketing. It appears to be a form of cybernetics where you use technical, cognitive, and linguistic models in order to organize your sensory experience into a functional system in which you can maximize control over the way in which you perceive reality and in which you convey it to others. Now, there are certain philosophical underpinnings to this system. It's essentially a psychological therapeutic system, which uses various aspects of classic psychological concepts, advanced linguistics, active imagination, a lot of sort of talking to yourself, you know, inside your head preferably, visualization, mnemonic devices. It's all very subjective. In a way, it's almost like talking yourself into a new reality where you can control your perceptions to some degree, organize your experience, and change your beliefs in a way that serves the outcome you prefer. I've come to conclude that a lot of this is mental smoke and mirrors. Hence why this book, The Structure of Magic, is titled in such a way. Much of the marketing motif in this book, and a lot of the jargon, is that of some mystical magic spells, and the practitioners are wizards. There's even a book titled Frogs into Princes. So it appeals to a certain set of new age kind of boomers that like have a fancy for mystical psychobabble. One might call it a pseudoscience. But I don't want to beat up on it too much. I mean, I'm sure there are people who use it quite effectively throughout their lives. And I do intend on continuing my study of it, if nothing else, as a sort of oddity or sideshow phenomenon, like what you might get at a carnival, along with some cotton candy or caramelized peanuts. I mean, I don't mind jumping on the circus train for a season and sort of perusing the gallery of freaks and oddities. It's kind of the stuff that dreams are made of, and wild delusions. After all, NLP claims many wild human abilities, such as changing your beliefs and even your own personal history, using language and visualization to shrink and diminish inconvenient emotional setbacks and traumas, while accentuating, enlarging, and expanding the submodalities of past successes and recreating those according to desired outcomes. There's that word again, those desired outcomes. So let's get into it a bit. The foundation of NLP begins with what's called the meta model. Later textbooks have claimed that one's functionality in NLP is determined by their proficiency in utilizing the meta model. And what the meta model is a series of questions one asks to another or to oneself in order to unpack the details of what's called the surface structure or the simple structure. When people put their thoughts into words, an organizing cognitive process is taking place, whereby generalization, deletion, and distortion are used to simplify a thought so that it can be conveyed in a digestible manner. Because if we were to give the deep structure of our thought, we could rant for hours and hours and hours about something, giving like every minute detail of our understanding about it before ever getting to the point. It would be kind of like your girlfriend talking to you. So mentally we create this simple structure through this modeling process of generalization, deletion, and distortion in order to save time and processing power in relating ideas to ourselves and to one another. Now, usually this process is automatic or unconscious, so the basic human processes of these diminutions isn't thoroughly thought out. So they can sometimes hide our biases, prejudices, and fallacious presuppositions. Now, through the meta model, we learn to ask particular questions which elicit explanations of deep structure content in order to expose these biases, question them, and make adjustments or repairs to our basic model of the world. So when they are repacked, we can more accurately communicate our model to ourselves and others. And they call this therapy. So that's the meta model in a nutshell. And that's exactly what the simple structure is. The simple structure is the nutshell. And the deep structure is the underlying map, which depicts the territory, which is reality itself. So the NLP dictum goes, the map is not the territory. Now, according to the NLP philosophy, the territory is not really knowable. That we live in a sort of solipsistic matrix of our own minds. And so the only thing to do really is to take that knowable environment and fashion it to our liking, or at least to our maximum utilitarian benefit, so that we can get the things that we want. Now, detractors would say it's essentially manipulative and self-centered, not much taking into account the feelings or best interest of others. But I could make the argument that it's more like a hammer which could be used to drive nails or, smash someone's skull to bits, right? So it doesn't really take account for morality in itself. But there is an aspect of it where ecology is taken into account, meaning the ecology of all persons involved. Does doing this or that detract or improve your relationship with this or that person? Does it leave the other person feeling better or worse about the situation? And will they ever speak to you again or buy from you again? Are you just selfishly taking what you can get, no matter the cost? Or are you developing a strong relationship with a repeat customer? So yes, it does take in sales and management as well. There's NLP books for salesmen. There's NLP books for managers. There are myriad books available on using NLP at work, NLP for sales and management, NLP for a strong and lasting marriage, NLP for dummies, and the list goes on and on. Family counseling. So what we've wound up with is a never-ending stream of NLP gurus and training seminars where people rake in millions of dollars selling NLP sales advice and training to over-eager entrepreneurs who wish to maximize their bank accounts and their businesses. They sell NLP t-shirts. But in the end, like most multi-level marketing, and college education for that matter, many of these entrepreneurs realize they can make more money as influencers teaching NLP to neophytes who are just entering the space, and so on and so on. And so they make the switch. It's a bit like television evangelism. Amway, Herbalife, Primerica, all those pyramid schemes. We're just bringing in our new crop of gurus. A lot of these online red pill gurus have taken the torch since my day of delving into this stuff. I've seen that space grow like into the podcasting world, and it certainly has evolved. Now, I got into NLP through the early 2000s phenomenon of pickup artists that exploded in the wake of Neil Strauss's book, The Game. Now, I was already sort of in the game. I had a job which availed me to daily frequent exposure to a vast array of women, which brought me into the world of frequent dating, the likes of which would inspire the awe and envy of many more capable, more famous, more rich, more prosperous rock stars and television personalities. But I did it. I was there. And I don't take much personal credit. It was just a corollary of circumstance more than anything. Like, if you're the only dude working at Crossroads in the most popular mall downtown, you're gonna get some pussy. It doesn't matter what you look like. So it goes. And so, in my lavish little pool of circumstance, a friend of mine brought to my attention the book, The Game, and the fact that there was this underground community of pickup artists going around using advanced techniques, game theory, and even hypnosis techniques in order to pick up women. And I thought, well, I'm already doing that. Like, what do I need a book for? And so one day, I was at Border Books with this girlfriend of mine, and I happened upon a book called How to Succeed with Women, was the name of the book. And I thumbed through it just a little bit. And I was just kind of scanning a few pages. And I thought, okay, so I know this, and I know that. Like, I've seen that before. Okay, well, there's something I haven't thought of. And, well, this is kind of cool. I mean, there really wasn't a lot out there, as far as I knew, in book form, about teaching men how to get laid. There was just that crap you sort of learn from your older brother or, some of your friends. But it always kind of seemed like nobody ever had your best interest in mind. Like, these guys were your competition. They weren't going to tell you the truth. And so people didn't readily part with the information. And then I remembered that I'd heard about the game. And so at that time, I wasn't really online at all. I had this busted old computer that didn't even work, and it was so old I couldn't even go online with it anymore. And I was poor and broke and didn't even have a car. I was macking on chicks on the bus and like getting them to come over to my house and calling them from payphones. That's how destitute I was at the time, but I made it work somehow. And so I read the game, and that book introduced me to Eric von Markovic, or Mystery. I mean, he had that VH1 show back in the day. And then I bought his book, The Mystery Method. And that opened up like this whole nother world to me. Because it wasn't just like a bunch of cheap parlor tricks like what you saw in the game. It was social dynamics. And it made sense. There was a logic to it. I realized at that point there was this sort of powerful weapon that you could like compete against the other guys. And that was what it was all about, was like social competition, evolutionary theory, and the idea that you've got all these guys in a room, and then there's these girls over there, and you're trying to get to the front of the line. You're trying to beat these other dudes away and get to the target before they get to it. And the book offered a method by which you could kind of cut right to the front of the line just by using social dynamics theory and certain just techniques, certain verbal techniques, certain concepts that most guys really don't think about. It just kind of gave you this extra edge. It's like going into like this sort of boxing ring, like on the playground, but you're the only kid who ever took karate, you know, and that's kind of where I sort of found myself with that. It was like I had stumbled across this sort of thing that men had been deprived of all of their lives. The secrets from a real bona fide pickup artist who had success and was selling his secrets. And so it kind of turbocharged what I was already doing, which, by the way, looking back, I don't think was a very good thing for me. But I'm glad I did it. And I'm also glad that it's all in the past. But it also opened other doors for me and taught me skills that I now use in other fields. And that's the thing with the pickup arts. I think most guys just use it to get laid for a while, and then they realize they can use it for other things. And then they move on to bodybuilding or creating a business or some kind of enterprise. It even leads some people into religion. But one of the things about the game is it introduced the use of NLP techniques to get pickup artists to not only use hypnosis techniques, which we can get to later, but also the learning aspect of NLP, where you learn to gauge your successes, organize processes, and maximize efficiency. There's a technique called chunking, where you take one phase of a process and focus on sharpening just that particular phase. Like in pickup, you've got your approach phase, your comfort building phase, and your closing phase. Some people are good openers, but then they crash and burn. Some people are good closers, if they can even get that far. Some people are good at building comfort, but they never get beyond that. So with chunking, you learn how to separate these phases, and in turn subphases of really any process, and learn to hone particular parts of the process until you can fine-tune your skills to any optimal level, to whatever degree you want. And so once I started getting a little older and losing my hair and sort of realizing that all this pickup stuff is more of a young man's game and not something I particularly wished to bring into my autumn years, I got into college. And I used a lot of the NLP skills I had acquired to really boost my academic success. And one of the things I learned is that in college, especially when you major in psychology like I did, that the psychology classes teach you a lot of the very same things that you learn in NLP. And that's really where NLP came from. A couple of college dorks aggregated all of this relevant information into a system whereby they could learn ways of modeling human behavior. They analyzed family therapists and depth psychologists, hypnotists, even people who worked on MK Ultra. I think Richard Bandler had said that Gregory Bateson actually lived across the street from him, and he used to go over there and talk to him. And Gregory Bateson had recommended that he study Milton Erickson. These are people who had learned to successfully change behavior in other people. And that's what it grew out of. The teachings of Gregory Bateson and Maslow and Skinner, the behaviorists. Plus the direct observation of therapists like Virginia Satir, Fritz Perls, and Milton Erickson. And so I'll probably do further episodes on this stuff later. I really just kind of wanted to introduce the subject because it is something I've delved into before. But it's been a long time since, and I'd like to bring it back to the surface to some degree. Maybe explore whether or not there really is anything to it, or if it's just a lot of hogwash. Okay, so I'll go into the PUA stuff just a little bit. The pickup artist culture. From the early 2000s, because that's the era of which I have some experience in it. Now, I do realize this movement, the red pill, as it's now sort of erroneously called, I don't really consider it red pill. To me, what the red pill is like opening your eyes to the New World Order and the globalist technocratic structure that's being imposed on us exponentially more every single day. To me, that's the red pill, is waking up to that stuff. The red pill isn't like figuring out that girls are full of shit, you know. And that's the whole thing with this red pill movement. It's like they don't even bother with a lot of the social dynamics and the NLP type of stuff. And I think they'd probably be better off if they did. If they did do the NLP, not in the hypnosis sense, but just sort of in the sense of organizing their learning process. I think that's what would probably benefit them more than anything. But it seems like they're more like a black pill. It seems like they've just decided that like women all suck, and so they're all going to be like this sort of male version of feminists. So I think the whole movement's really gotten a bad rap. And I mean, it's kind of embarrassing. And that's mostly due to like a certain set or sort of subset of like YouTube influencers who are very young, inexperienced, and technologically spoiled. Most of them never grew up in an environment where boys are boys and girls are girls. And it was okay to approach someone and like, how shall we say, bust a move. Remember the old Young MC song from the days of yore? I think Flea played bass on that with his stuffed animal pants. Well, back in my day, we didn't have dating websites or social media or even texting for that matter. We didn't have no Instagram and all this millennial and Gen Z bullshit that actually hinders men and women from finding each other. We've moved into this sort of puritanist area where like the idea of like a boy macking on a girl is somehow considered like creepy or inappropriate. It was never like that when I was a teenager. We all did that shit. That's how people procreate. That's how we make babies. This is the way that we continue the population forward into the future. But see, that's the problem. That's where I don't want to get too much into the globalist implications of this or the environmentalist implications of it or the Malthusian implications of it, because that's what it is. I mean, the whole thing is psychological warfare against humans, to the idea that by procreating you're putting like carbon into the atmosphere. God forbid the trees have something to breathe so that they can deliver oxygen. But hey, that's another argument for another time. But I mean, that I think is really what's behind it. You know, the new technology is a little bit of where like the PUA stuff kind of came from, because at some point people needed a leg up because people were starting to act in dysfunctional and disproportionate ways. And it became this thing where like guys kind of needed help at some point, because back in the 50s we had like social structure and social institution, and there were dances at school, and there were functions, social functions, that enabled like mixers for like boys and girls to meet in wholesome ways, and they could kind of hit it off. But all that stuff is gone now. And so it's kind of got to the point now to where it becomes almost sort of like a survivalist kind of activity. Not to mention the onset of this type of mentality that treats adolescents as children and doesn't really allow them to explore one another socially, at the very least, at a younger age. Where today, if somebody is under 18, they're like a child. And I can understand to some degree that, we protect children and we want to be protective of children. But when I was a kid growing up, once you hit 13, you were an adolescent. And that word doesn't even exist in the English language anymore, it seems. Like no one is referred to as an adolescent. I hear 16-year-olds say, I'm a child. Like, we would have never said that. Once you were of age and you were in adolescence, you were like on a fast track to adulthood, and we were trying our best to jump to the front of the line and cross that bridge as soon as possible. Whatever kind of hazing it took to cross that line into adulthood, we were smoking, we were drinking, we were doing all that stuff we weren't supposed to be doing. And I look at kids now, I mean, in a way it's kind of good, they're a little bit more innocent, but the idea that we treat them as if they're children, we call them children until the day they turn 18, and then we kick them out on the street. And there's something wrong going on there. And it's not allowing people to develop in a healthy way, because they're not given any responsibility. And I remember when I was in high school, the whole idea that, like, if you get your girlfriend pregnant, dude, that's on you, man. Like, you're going to be responsible for that. You are going to be accountable for that. And that doesn't even exist anymore. The whole idea of teenagers being held accountable for their behavior in that regard is like out the window. It's like, nope, abortion. Abortion is what you get. You don't get none of that accountability. You don't get any of that responsibility. Get rid of it. That's the bottom line. You're not ready. And when I was a teenager, it was like, you get your girlfriend pregnant, dude, you're going to be working at the lumber yard. Hopefully you can get on, hopefully you can get on with a union or something. Get a union job. Start packing meat or something. You're working construction. Be able to pay those bills. Now it's just like, now it's just none of that. There's no accountability anymore, because they're children and they need to be treated like children. And then who knows, maybe they'll end up just staying home the rest of their lives. They'll never have to move out. But with me, I moved out the day I turned 18. I was gone. I was out of there. And even back then, like a lot of these kind of boy-girl reactions, sometimes they could lead to sex, but more often than not, they just more or less resulted in like lessons learned or bruised egos or broken hearts, and you kind of learned a few things about life, to where once you got into adulthood, you were a little bit more prepared and you were a little bit more realistic about the world and your place in it. I'm not saying that like at 18 we had it all figured out, but I think that we had a little bit more of a head on our shoulders as far as where we stood. We weren't so dysmorphic, and like we had a good idea of where we stood amongst our peers. There were times we had to sort of get the dust off ourselves and pick ourselves back up and lick our wounds and move forward to live another day. Maybe hope for a lucky break one day as we continue to compete against our peers. My point here is, by the time we reached adulthood, through a healthy period of adolescence, with its attendant scrapes and bruises, we came into adulthood with a more or less realistic understanding of our limitations and weaknesses. A little bit of a springboard off of which we could spend our 20s refining our personalities and developing our physique to its maximum effectiveness, with the general aim of finding someone to marry and have children with as we move along to our next phase of improving our education and our careers. In other words, a culture of normal, healthy, quasi-institutional life existence in society. Today, much of that is interrupted by social media, texting, video games, and media overload, and the commoditization of this sort of virtual version of sex as we've come to experience it. Now, I don't know how it's going for the kids at this point, but as for adult relationships, I think the dynamics have skewed quite a bit by this sort of narcissistic antinatalist mentality, where a lot of phony social media bolstering by trolls and virtue signalers has given people a sort of diluted sense of who they are and what they're capable of. Thanks to the body positivity movement, we have a decidedly unhealthy population of spoiled, uneducated brats who spend their college experience cutting and pasting answers off of Quizlet, in between selfies and online shaming and doxing of their online social media rivals. I'm going to submit my paper that I reworded off of Wikipedia. But first let me destroy this bitch who posted a laughing emoji under a picture of my belly fat. So anyway, I think I might have made my introduction here. So the PUA skill set, as one might develop it, enabled a group of disaffected and dysfunctional younger people to learn their social sexual skills in a way that yielded at least some results in a society which is crumbling. One could sort of bypass the dysfunctionality of the other in meeting halfway, pull them away from their mirror for a second, and say, hey, there's still some people left in the world worth spending some time with. And before jumping to any conclusion, just keep in mind that women have been doing this sort of thing for decades. We all know what those articles are about in Cosmo and Vogue and all those stupid magazines. There have been generations of young men who, even back in my day, were spending way too much time in their bedroom nerding out, playing Dungeons and Dragons, practicing on the guitar, lifting their little junior weight set, reading their little sci-fi novels, and sort of leaving their sexual counterparts to the predations of more aggressive, less talented, less intelligent, kind of more predatory, definitely older dudes. So women have always had their magazines and their social support groups and cosmetic products to sort of boost their own game and gain an advantage over a lot of the socially clueless guys. And so women have always maintained a type of social and cosmetic skill set, which includes fashion. Now, once the men discovered this PUA movement, it gave guys the opportunity to start to think more like chicks and pay attention to the way they dress, the way they talk, the way they act, and to cultivate an overt sexuality that draws attention. And in doing so, they would divert their energies away from things like video game theory, book learning, obsessive like collector interests, and even discover new aspects that girls were already hip to, like psychology and social dynamics and fashion, and even a bit of a sassy attitude. Some of these guys learned to sort of outgirl the girl and pique their interest in a way that they weren't quite used to. As some people critique this sort of thing as manipulation, it really got guys to start listening more and to start paying more attention to what girls were really interested in. to bridge the gap and meet them on their own ground where they already are. And on top of that, everybody was getting laid, so it was a net positive, I think, for the most part. Not only that, I think it even maybe nudged up the population a little bit, even if only briefly, until the dark aspect of social media finally reared its ugly head. Of course, now the population has taken a dive. Now, I can't really here, for the sake of time and space, get into the reasons for this right now. That's a whole nother episode for another time, because it involves the powers that be, globalist agendas, mass media fuckery, psychological operations, and psychological warfare. And now the whole PUA thing has morphed into what the online influencers are now calling the red pill or the manosphere. I call it the mayonnaise sphere because it's basically just a bunch of coomers. They're not really trying to bridge the gap. They're not meeting women where they are. They're acting like women, but not in a way in which women can relate. It's more like just a male version of feminism at this point. They bash women, they tell each other that marriage is a wash, that family is for the birds, and the women are already thinking the same thing. And it's all about getting laid. It's not even about like really developing the self to any spiritual degree. They just want to like improve their finances and work out and get on steroids and shrink their dick and do whatever else, act like an asshole. They're not starting families. It's all just very misguided. Anyway, so I've made my point. So let's just skip ahead now to the meat and potatoes. The PUA skill set, as I'd come to realize it, was more about being in complete control of your social behavior so that you were acting in accordance with your will instead of just being led around by your nose, or your dick rather. You could exercise choice in the way in which you present yourself, or how you treat yourself, or how you treat others. A desperate, insecure man makes for a bad boyfriend. The goal of a PUA is to transform himself into the type of man that a woman would want to date, instead of her condescending to break you off even though you don't deserve it, leaving her unfulfilled in the process. The whole game is to find out what she wants, what she's missing, and provide that for her. And this is something that the boomers never really did. They just kind of settled for someone their age down at the end of the block. Spit out a couple of kids and then spent the rest of their lives hating each other. So the way in which the skill set works is you go out and start cold approaching, saying hello, learning how to smile, make other people smile, at least how to make yourself look happy, to make other people happy, to make other people smile. Sometimes you gotta fake it till you make it. Put yourself in a position where you can make connections. And along the way, you're gonna make a bunch of mistakes. You're going to get rejected. And that's the first thing that you should go out and try to do. Get rejected as many times as possible, to the point to where it doesn't even faze you anymore. And that's half of the battle right there. But that in itself isn't game. It doesn't make you successful to go around getting rejected 100% of the time. I mean, that doesn't fly. Any creep can do that. The important thing you are doing here, and this is going to sound kind of strange, but this is where the rubber meets the road, is that in the act of going out and making these connections, that later, afterwards, you go home and make a sort of journal or record of the things you did wrong and the things you did right. So you keep a sort of scorecard on yourself as you move from one situation into another, where you are approaching, interfacing, performing to some degree. Also getting acquainted with another living, breathing person, preferably a female. Trying to close with some sort of an agreement, whether that means agreeing to meet later to go on a date, Getting a phone number? Having another chance to interact and get to know that person? It all depends on where you want to take the interaction. Sometimes you may just want a friend, an ally. Maybe you want sex. Maybe you want a new girlfriend. Maybe a wife. Maybe you're just practicing to get to the next level. At any rate, you have a process going and you're enhancing your skills and abilities to interact with and experience the range of possibilities in dealing with the opposite sex. You are gaining experience from which you can base future interactions. The important thing is you are going back to your scorecard, which you are going to make record of at your earliest convenience. You make sure you remember this woman's name. You have a record of whom you've interacted with, what you accomplished, what you did right, and what you did wrong. And what is the rule that can be learned from this interaction? I cannot express the importance of this enough. What is the rule? The acquisition of your own personal skill set is a process of collecting rules which you live by and never deviate from at all costs. And at the end of a period of time, you shall have amassed, if you possess any capacity for self-reflection and self-awareness, you shall have amassed a lot of rules. And your job is to live by these rules and never break them, or at least try not to. And will you break them? Of course you'll break them. We can't even keep the 10 Commandments for 5 minutes, much less 1,000 rules that you're going to stick into your skill set in various spots. You're going to make mistakes. But the fewer mistakes you make and the more you keep an eye on those mistakes and the more you're aware of them, the better off you're going to be. So if you can't even keep the 10 Commandments, how are you going to keep the 5,000 rules of pickup and seduction? And that's another thing. You are practicing seduction. Learn to live with this reality. You have to stop being ashamed of the things you want and the things you're trying to get. You have to remember, women are doing this all the time. And you're doing it too. You're just doing it in a sloppy way. You might as well do it in a way that yields the results you want, and not, you're just not some bumbling idiot kind of dipping around through life hoping you're going to crash your dick into something every now and then. So as a PUA, you are just learning that you can do all of this as well. It just becomes not so one-sided. You'll learn to think like a woman, and then you can meet her on her own ground. Doesn't mean you have to become one. You just understand where they're coming from. You've just thought the same things that they're thinking, and you've already gone there in your mind. And if you're good at it, you can do it quicker than they do. Whatever they're thinking, you've already thought of it. So the next step, after overcoming your fear, keeping a record, self-reflecting, creating rules for yourself, is to stop being ashamed of the thing that you were doing. You've been trying half-heartedly to do this thing your entire life. Why are you being ashamed of consciously getting better at it? And women will occasionally try to make you feel guilty for this because they know it works. You know, they try and throw you off. Of course they're going to try and throw you off. Why wouldn't they? Like I said, they do this all the time, and you are just bringing yourself up to their level. Never underestimate how many dating type of experiences women are having behind your back. If you've ever had a female roommate, you know women are always in the game. They are constantly having interactions. While you're nerding out with all your goofy hobbies, they are interacting. And they have the home field advantage because it is their domain. Interpersonal interaction is a female domain. The job of the PUA is to change that balance in his favor. You have to have more interactions than she is having if you hope to have any advantage at all. Unless you look like Jason Momoa, and then you don't have to worry about it. So unless you look like Jason Momoa, you're going to have to develop some skills in order to throw her off balance and demonstrate to her that you are in control of the situation. Your situation and the situation you are in together. You are building a cozy little nest in which she can feel secure and let her guard down. Because you have stepped up to the plate, demonstrated your competence, and she isn't creeped out by you. Because you are masterful in a domain in which she is used to having the upper hand. You have provided a sense of security, and now she feels safe and capable of letting her guard down. In being herself and allowing a relationship to begin to develop. Now, what you do after that is up to you. If you want to be a total scumbag, you're going to be a total scumbag. If you're going to step up and be a man, you're going to be the man. The point is, you keep getting better. You keep improving yourself until you become that man that any woman in her right mind would want to date. And remember, there are a lot of stupid, insane, inferior, unworthy women out there who don't deserve the time, energy, and attention of a man who has developed some self-worth, confidence, and value. And that's where the inner game comes in. You could get to the point where you're very competent at picking up women. You're an idiot if you're fucking them all. You have to learn to pick and choose. You have to possess the ability to detect red flags and have the self-respect to walk away. You don't go around pumping and dumping inferior women. You're going to have a train of psychos coming after you. You do not want that drama. Don't chase every woman who has an ass. Most of the time you will realize it's a bad idea to sleep with her. The higher I got in my game, the more women I didn't sleep with. You learn to say no. You learn to walk away. You learn to reject certain women instead of the other way around. There is no surer path to self-loathing than having unworthy women rejecting you. Don't be that guy. You learn to walk away from women who don't embody the values you are looking for in a mate. And you are saving them the hassle as well. If she belongs to the streets, you don't want to keep her from that. You're not going to save some ratchet-ass bimbo from the error of her ways. Have some self-respect. I can't emphasize enough the importance of creating boundaries for yourself and then having the fidelity to enforce those boundaries. And that doesn't mean act like some spoiled prima donna. That just means have the self-respect not to allow a woman to dictate your boundaries and then having her own way with you. Because they will. Most women will test your boundaries, and there are evolutionary reasons for this. Don't disparage it, but don't fall for it either. It's a shielding mechanism which prevents her from being taken advantage of in her own course. Not only that, a woman will shit test you to make sure you're not some sheep in wolf's clothing. And yes, you heard that correctly. We've all heard of a wolf in sheep's clothing. Well, the opposite is just as repugnant. A sheep in wolf's clothing is a man who pretends he has a strong frame, but is actually quite weak. He's faking it. Lady Gaga wrote a song about it. Paper Gangsta, right? Lady Gaga's first album. Listen to it. She spells it out for you. There's PUA all over that shit. Okay, the skill set. So anyway, in addition to keeping a scorecard of your interactions and keeping a list of rules which govern your future interactions, you have to be able to organize these rules into a cohesive system by which you can access these rules according to the situation. This is where certain aspects of NLP come in, because NLP encompasses a wide range of skills, including language modeling, logic, body language, deep psychology, even hypnosis techniques, but also learning theory and learning models. Now, these learning models are really the first step. These skills are used in college course study for efficiency in learning, information retention, and behavioral enforcement. Also, mnemonic skills and hypnosis techniques. Not only do you use hypnosis to some degree on your target, but you're also targeting yourself. Now, a lot of people get weirded out by the idea that you're using hypnosis on your target, but the truth is, we use some form of hypnosis every day. We just don't realize we're doing it, so we do it in a sloppy manner, whether we like it or not. With NLP, you learn to use hypnosis effectively and ethically. There is always a consideration for ecology when using NLP. Ecology is the idea of a positively shared outcome. We do this in sales. If you want to be a good salesman, you need repeat customers. You don't want angry customers. If you leave a trail of angry customers, you soon live to regret it. Successful salesmen leave a trail of satisfied customers who want to come back, who feel they have gained something from the experience and want more. That's how you want the women in your life to feel. You do not want to be leaving angry women in your trail. Never underestimate that kind of chaos. You don't want it. So if you're going to use hypnosis in order to help you in the process, you have to use it responsibly. You have to use it ethically. And you use it in a way in which everybody wins. And then you've got a repeat customer who's always left wanting more, who is going to put out a good word for you to all their friends and family. And that's how quality of life and relationships happens, not by manipulating or taking advantage of people. Now, back to our skill set. We were talking about organizing our list of rules. We are going to use a method called chunking, whereby you break an interaction down into phases. We are going to chunk our information down into categories, following a series of phases, which occur naturally in any seduction. Again, don't be afraid of that word. The best kind of seduction is mutual. You are seducing her, but she is also seducing you. So don't fool yourself. Every beautiful woman knows how to seduce. If you learn how to seduce, you are the exception. And this is the game we play. You might think you are the seducer. And one day, you might find yourself on the ass end of a seduction. It will happen. Sometimes you will get played the whole time thinking that you were the player. You met her, you spit some game, she bought your game, you guys had sex, you thought you were the winner. Next thing you know, she dumped you on your ass, and now she's off fucking some other dude. And you will realize you just got played. But why not? It's all fair, because that's the game you are in. Don't forget what you signed up for, and don't fall prey to your own weaknesses. You could become a sex addict if you're not careful. Addicted to validation, and that is not a good place for any man to be. So don't be a sex addict. These are rules for your skill set that you generally end up finding further down the road as you progress. Because most guys start out just trying to get laid. It takes longer to figure out how to manage all of the women in your life, depending, of course, on what your goals are. You might just want to be in a happy monogamous relationship. But if you're anything like how I used to be, you will easily find yourself in a harem of 5 to 6 women at a time. And believe me, you do not want more than that. And some women are okay with this. And remembering the old rule, don't leave angry women in your wake. If you're going to be polyamorous to any degree, you're a lot better off being upfront about it. You'd be surprised how many beautiful women are okay with this, because a lot of them are as well. If she's already got a string of dudes and you've got a string of girls, I'm not saying that's healthy, but she will understand, whether she pretends to or not. She might want you all to herself while she goes out and has all the fun that she wants. Just treat yourself good and treat her good, and don't be an asshole. If you're going to have a harem, have a harem. Just know what the hell you're getting into. It took me having 5 girlfriends one time just to realize I'd be happier just jerking off. And that's when it's time to flush the toilet and either join the priesthood or start over again. The skill set is your guide. The skill set is manifold. It can take on many forms, in other words. You should develop separate skill sets for different things in your life, ranging from your dating life, your education, finances, your health, your martial arts, your job, down to your Bible study. Okay? The skill set is little more than a humanistic ladder, which you use to ascend to higher and higher levels of proficiency in any endeavor in your life. Just don't let it turn into a Tower of Babel. We are only taking ourselves so seriously here. Okay? We are not gods. We always have God above us, whom we are ultimately responsible to. We are only human, and human we are, despite what the transhumanist goblins of the New World Order want you to believe. So don't be like them. Hold on to your humanity. Don't get any of the genetic treatments. Don't upload your consciousness to the cloud. Don't chop anything off. And make a fucking skill set. It's a humanistic pursuit, but keep it in check. One very important aspect of NLP is ecology. Ecology keeps us in check as we develop higher competencies and higher abilities. So as we operate, we are not hurting others. Make all the money you want, just don't steal it. And leave every woman in your life better than you found her. Don't hurt people. I cannot emphasize this enough. It's like martial arts or owning a firearm. It's a tool. A hammer can build as well as tear down. So always keep ecology in mind in everything you do. So the skill set is a list of items, rules basically, under a series of rubrics. Now I'll give you a real quick rundown of the basic rubrics of the PUA skill set. The very first heading is general rules. These are evergreen rules that you should have down first and foremost. Things you never forget, which apply in all circumstances. These are things like nobody is out of your reach. Everyone can be caught. In the game, there are rules, and the rules must be obeyed because they work. What women say they want, generally, is not necessarily what they respond to. Most women will give you the information that you need to attract them, but you have to pay attention. It's usually found between the lines. Always remember her name the first time she tells you. Don't put yourself in the position to have to ask her a second time. Always listen to her and be aware of her body language cues. Okay? Shit like that. These are the basic rules which apply to every phase of the interaction. The second heading is inner game. Inner game is how you see yourself. This is also a very important aspect of pickup. It is so important that it goes before all of the tactical rules. This includes things like your self-esteem, your spiritual condition, your sense of inner peace, how you feel about yourself. Are you a piece of shit? Are you a good person? Do you have personal standards and boundaries? Do you allow women to walk all over you? Do you smoke crack? Do you have good hygiene? These are all of the most important aspects that are generally going to take care of most of the things that are going to make you attractive or not. If you master inner game, you really don't need all of the tactical stuff. If you are at peace with yourself, you will be naturally attractive. This is the hardest to attain. It is the easiest to lose, and it is the most important. Do you have integrity? Do you manage your ecology? Is your personal philosophy epistemologically sound? This is inner game. Okay, so the first tactical section I will lay down is called At the Venue. This could be a nightclub, a library, a coffee shop, a shopping mall, if you could find one. Any social gathering is a potential venue. I probably shouldn't say your church, but a church isn't a bad venue if you're looking for a wife. As per your ecology, I wouldn't recommend getting anything started there you don't plan on committing to. But yeah, meeting your spouse at church is quite common. Many people marry within the church. But basically any place which could be considered a target-rich environment. By this I mean, are there a lot of women there? And one more note, the game doesn't necessarily only apply to women or potential suitors. We use the game in every aspect of our lives, whether we know it or not. At any time you are engaged in a social situation, you are playing the game. It's all about controlling your frame of reference and enjoying the process. Just be a good person and stay humble. Okay, I'm going to leave you all on a cliffhanger here. There's much more to this. I'm slowly starting to realize I should have all of this information behind a paywall. No, I will let it out, but slowly. Just a tip, alright? I can't possibly make this program any longer without making it indigestible. You get the point. There is a method to the madness. Like I said, if you're a rich, handsome, already charming guy, you don't need any of this. There is such a thing as pretty privilege. I developed my skill set when I was broke, minimum wage earning, no car having, picking up chicks on the bus, okay? So that's how well this stuff actually works. I'll get into the tactical stuff later. I'm just scratching the surface. So yeah, this stuff really works. And there's nothing nefarious about it, unless you're a nefarious person. These are just tried and true rules of life by which you can have many wonderful, fruitful, lasting, meaningful relationships. And who knows, maybe I need to get back on it. I mean, I've been away from this stuff for a really long time. I live a fairly lonely existence in my studies and at work and as a parent and in solitude. I'm not a very social person these days. I'm at a whole different point in my game. I spend most of my time trying to develop and leverage a financial situation by which I don't really have to worry about my future, my present. I can just focus on learning for now. I spend a lot of time reading. And I will continue this program so long as anybody's interested in hearing it. If people don't like it, then I'll just keep it to myself. However, I did develop something remarkable. Many of my friends have begged me to publish this stuff in book form. And I never wanted to do this, but it is helpful. So, we'll leave it there for now. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this. I'm always willing to try and do different things. I think it would be just kind of boring if I just went through books all the time. And still some of these videos, including this one, I've been reading off my notes. I did a lot of automatic writing in the preparation for this one, but pretty soon I'm just going to start talking off the cuff again. And maybe I will try and implement some better skills in arranging my notes to where I'm not reading verbatim, to where maybe I can just make like a little outline and sort of fill in the gaps. I'm going to try different things as I move forward. But I've got a few more books I'm working on. I think the next one I'm going to do is Miles Copeland, Beyond Cloak and Dagger and Game of Nations, which is a study of the CIA, a history of the CIA and how it works. Miles Copeland, an ex-CIA agent. He's dead now. He's the father of Stuart Copeland, the drummer from the Police. Nice little tidbit of trivia there. And I'm just going to go through, I think, the introductions to those books to just kind of lay a small foundation there, a small layer, a little layer of peat moss. And I have begun writing some notes on the first chapters of Fyodor Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov. So I'm going to go a little bit deeper into that. I've spoken about it before, but just in very vague terms. And I have some other ones I want to work on. I'm going to work on Tragedy and Hope pretty soon. I've thought about doing a critique of Naomi Klein's book, This Changes Everything, which is about the so-called climate crisis. And I began reading it, and it's just ridiculous. And so I kind of want to just go through it and chop it all up. She makes some stunning admissions in the book, I think, inadvertently, but I picked up on them. And I'd like to expose some of it. Another book that I intend on doing some analysis of is another CIA book, this one by Tim Weiner, called Legacy of Ashes. And I will have to give the cast of characters of CIA history. And so his book is good for a foundation on that. I want to get back into Stranger in a Strange Land, pick up where I left off. I've already done a few episodes where I speak about that one. And then I'd like to get back to Clive Barker's The Great and Secret Show. And so, not only that, Howard Sakar's History of Israel. It's almost time to do another episode of that. I think I've gotten further with that book probably than any of the others up till now. I've done a pretty deep analysis on that so far, so I'm going to continue that. And I did start reading The History of the Arab Peoples by Hourani. And that one was pretty interesting so far. I mean, I got it from the library. I read about the first 25 pages. And I think I'm going to get a French textbook, and I'm going to start studying French. But I probably won't publish any of that. I'm going to keep that under my hat until I develop something I can share. It's going to be probably a while on that. There's 3 languages I wanted to start learning. And I've already got 5, including English. So the 5 languages I've mainly studied up till now would be, well, I speak English fairly well, and I've got Spanish, Italian, Russian, Dutch, so that's 5. I grew up with quite a bit of German, but I've never been very good at it. So I would like to tackle German. I'd like to start working on some French and Portuguese. So that would be 8 languages. So I think with 8 languages, I don't know that I should really try and learn more than that. I have a tendency for complexity, and I really do need to keep that in check. I remember at one time I tried to start learning how to play all these different instruments. Even with my crypto, I invest in like 20 different coins. There's no way I could possibly follow all of that to any degree of accuracy in technical analysis as far as trends are going. But I just have a little bit here and a little bit there, and that's the way I've always been. And so I do like to hedge my bets. I like to diversify. And I've got a lot of books. I have a lot of different books that I'm reading. I have diversity in the books that I read. There's a lot of books to be read, and I don't know how long I'm going to live, so I'm just going to keep plugging away at it. I don't want to waste too much of my time on one book. I usually read about 20 or 30 pages, and I move on to another book, and I've got this my queue of books keeps growing. I've got at least 50 right now, 50 to 60 books that I'm just kind of cycling through. I've already spoken about that. But anyway, that's it. I mean, I've said quite a bit, and I think this program is long enough. So, like all good things, looks like this one's coming to an end. Goodbye.